I frequently get asked how I get invited onto so many marketing podcasts and how we're able to produce so much content at such a high frequency. And the answer is really intertwined. For me, I'm able to go on so many podcasts because of the fact that I have built up a reputation as a podcast guest, and therefore, in order for me to get onto that next podcast is now a lot easier. But if you're looking at starting out, here's the exact steps that I took to get featured on over 30 podcasts this year alone.
My name is Roche. I'm the CEO of Catalyst Consulting, a full-service demand generation agency that specializes in partnering with early-stage B2B SaaS companies.
You have to treat reaching out to a podcast host as a sales pitch. You're trying to get yourself onto their podcast. A lot of podcast hosts can be very, very protective of the quality, as they should be, the quality of the candidate coming on, and therefore they want to make sure that ultimately you are an expert in the field that you talk about, and secondly, that you're in a position where you can explain it very eloquently, so they want to see that you've been on other podcasts. But if every podcast wants you to have been on other podcasts, how do you get you first? For me, I started off by going on very small podcasts to be able to actually showcase my speaking ability and the expertise that I have in demand generation. From here, I would take the clips, I would edit them, I would chop them down, and I would form snippets that I can promote on social media, tagging all the podcast hosts on them. I'd also then ask the podcast host if they could recommend 3 other podcasts that I could go on that they'd either be willing to make the introduction to or share the names of the podcast with me. That way I can start to further my network of podcast hosts and ultimately reach a larger audience. 90% of the time, the podcast hosts were more than happy to make the introduction, and for the other 10%, they did all recommend 3 other podcasts that I could reach out to that they personally enjoyed listening to. From there, I could actually take the content that I had produced on the previous podcast, send that as an example to the next podcast, and say, hey, I was introduced by this person, I was referred by this person, I'd love to come on your podcast and talk about something similar. Or if you have a different idea as a topic you'd like to talk about, I'd be more than happy to discuss this with you. Would you be willing to set up a 15-minute call? This was crazy effective at getting people to jump on an introductory call where we could get to know one another, form that relationship, and then they were much more willing to have me come on as a podcast host. This rinse and repeat method is something that I've been doing all year, and it wasn't until about 6 months ago that I actually started getting invited onto podcasts rather than having to go and promote myself. You'll hit a point when you've been on so many podcasts and so many of the same podcasts and the same networks that you've been promoting yourself on that you become so well known in those fields that eventually you will start to get invited onto podcasts rather than necessarily having to promote yourself constantly. Currently, I limit myself to about 2 podcast recordings per month because of the fact that we are producing so much content outside of podcasts right now. However, if you're looking to kickstart your content creation and really want to go on a lot of podcasts very, very quickly, follow the methodology that I've just discussed, and I guarantee you'll be on 25 podcasts in the first 6 months.